Disturbing, isn't it? We were together at Ohio University, and he has been very much involved in the publications we did, first Mundisatium and then Translation Review. And he also specialized in translation, and he will be today talking about the Bible translations, which has become a topic of extreme importance because quite a few of the translators from the Bible were killed. I was surprised when I read this or heard it at the time. And so the Bible has always had its own existence with a lot of pudor, things to explode, etc. And so we're looking forward to his presentation. He is extremely well oriented in that area and has been here before, and the students were very glad we could have a discussion of the Bible, which is normally not a regular part of the translation workshop. Ben Sabro is also a colleague of ours, is here and has been involved in a lot of those same topics. So we're looking forward to that, and after he presents, you can ask all the questions you might have stored in your precious brain. So it's very important. So with this in mind, I think we can wait just another few moments. And I asked somebody else, I think Shannon asked to have it recorded so that future students can have a look at it. It's my pleasure to introduce him. We have, fortunately, during the 59s, we have never fought each other, which is progress in the world today. And we have, together with him, we have produced moments of extreme importance for the development of translation. So we welcome Professor Hoeksema.
Thank you, Ryan. It is a pleasure to be here. I always enjoy my time coming to talk to classes at UTD. And I do bring a subject matter that may be a little different than what you're exposed to in a translation workshop or in a regular class. And that is the Bible. It's potentially incendiary, potentially controversial, but at the same time, it is the most complex, the most comprehensive, and the most challenging translation enterprise ever undertaken. Specifically, I speak of rendering the Bible in English translation, a project that has been going on since the 14th century. Before I get to specifics, you have a handout that I'd like you to just look at it as I prompt you, okay? I know when I was a student, I had to look at the whole handout right away, but I'll let you know when there are things that I'll reference on the handout. When I was a young undergraduate teacher, teaching undergraduates, that is, I was given the assignment of an existential literature class with Camus and Sartre and Kafka and all the rest. And I decided at the last minute to put in the book of Job, because the book of Job is as modern an existential work as anything you'll see in the 20th century. It's a book about why is there evil in the world? Why is there suffering? Why do we go through what we do only to end up dead? Where is God's intervention? And 95% of the book of Job is the debate between Job and his friends about that very topic. How do we account for the presence of suffering and death without any redemptive quality? How do we even compute that? The last chapter of Job is the voice out of the whirlwind, as you know, where God comes and says, all right, everybody shut up. Who invented the Leviathan, the big beast in the ocean? Who created the flowers and the trees? I did. Now, get on with the business of living. So it's a very weird book. It took about 700 years for it to come together over the history of Hebrew literature. But it played very well as a topic. And I asked students if that was a pleasing addition to the class, and they were happy to do it. So I then, next semester, did a course called the Bible as Literature, where we took multiple books from both the Old and the New Testament. You're the audience tonight, but I want to tell you, before I ask you what kind of audience you are at some point during the afternoon here, there were three kinds of audiences that emerged from talking about the Bible as literature. There were students who were steeped in the Bible. They had been to church all their life. They went to catechism, they went to Sunday school, they listened to hundreds of sermons. They knew the Bible. There was a group that knew casually the Bible. David and Goliath, Garden of Eden, some of the narratives of Jesus' life, but they didn't have it in a religious instruction setting, and they didn't particularly have any investment in it. The third group knew nothing about the Bible. They knew there was such a thing, but they had not had any exposure to it, and they didn't have any particular opinions on it. And I found that that group was the group I like to work with the most, because they came in a tabula rasa. They had no biases. They had no investment in telling me what they thought and what they didn't like about what I thought. They simply listened. And what they told me was, I'm in this class because my education in Western civilization is incomplete if I don't know something about the Bible. And they were right. Whether you want to believe in the Bible or not, it has been a defining document in the evolution of the values and ideas that dominate our Western world. So you think about what kind of audience you are, and then listen to the way things evolve today. And maybe we talk about that a few minutes on. I also want to ask you if you have a favorite translation of the Bible. And if you do, just call it out. Let me hear what you read and what you think is a prized translation from your perspective. Anybody?
The New Revised Standard Version?
The 1989?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, the New Revised Standard Version is the newest translation. It's at the bottom of the sheet on the first page that I handed out to you, and we'll get to that. It was also upgraded or updated in 2021. So if you're looking for the most recent translation, it is that one. Yes. Anyone else?
I like the New King James Version.
The New King James. Mm-hmm. What's wrong with the Old King James?
It's difficult to read.
Yeah, the New King James is actually considered to be the beginning of modern English, and it's comprehensible. There are a few archaisms like thee, thy, thou things, and a few words that you may have to look up. But usually the beginning of modern English is dated from the King James Bible in 1611. It was finally produced. And in 1616, Shakespeare dies. And between Shakespeare and what he produced in the King James Bible in 1611, you have the beginning of what we call modern English. So the New King James is an attempt to make the language more accessible, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And in that respect, it's not a translation at all. It's what we call paraphrasing a translation. It took the rough edges off. So if you are studying translation, you know that's not true translation. It's editing, it's redacting, it's paraphrasing. A perfectly legitimate book to read to get content, for sure.
Before it was translated, in which language was written?
Which
the
one?
Bible. In which language was it written the first time?
We're going to get to that. We will get to that. That is a key consideration. Yes. All right, we have one tradition here. So think about your audience, where you fit in. Anybody else want to throw out a translation? No? Okay. Let me clarify a couple terms too. I'm old-fashioned. I'm not going to say BCE and CE. They're harder to say than AD and BC. So just allow me that anachronism when I am dating things throughout history. Also, I will be referring to Hebrews, Israelites, and Jews. And most people don't know the difference. Are they all the same? No, they're not. Hebrews refers to a group of people who migrated out of the Mesopotamian Fertile Crescent. They gradually, over hundreds of years, made their way over to what we know today as Palestine, Israel territory. And along the way, they bumped into big cultures, Babylonian, Akkadian, Persian. And in the process, they adopted their food, their rituals, their clothing, and their language. And the Hebrews became a Semitic speaking people because they ran into other Semitic cultures. And it is thought that somewhere around 1500 BC, they developed an alphabet. They developed a language. So the Hebrew language, which forms the basis of the Old Testament and what Christians call the Old Testament, it came out of that contact with big cultures as they migrated, and then the appropriation of those forms. Israelites. Israelites refers to the Hebrews after they were in Egypt in captivity, and then went to what they called their promised land, Canaan. And they conquered, first of all, Jericho and Ai, and eventually Jerusalem. They took it from the Jebusites, maybe around 1100, 1150 BC. Why are they called Israelites all of a sudden and not Hebrews? Because they had a country. And what did they call the country? Israel. So that's when their name changed and the character of their culture and civilization changed. Jews. Where do we get that term? The Babylonians came and conquered Jerusalem in 586 BC. They were a far greater power than the 12 tribes of Israel, and they destroyed the temple that Solomon built, leveled it almost to the ground, and took the now called Jews back to Babylon, one of the first great diaspora for the Jewish people. They're called Jews at that point after the tribe of Judah. It's just a derivation from one of the 12 tribes, the smallest one. Benjamin and Judah were the smallest of the tribes. So Hebrews, Israelites, Jews gives you a sense of the evolving history of the people. I want to go over some different things with you, but before we start on the background, I want to read you a quote from a book that I think is just remarkable. It's called The Story of the English Bible and the Revolution It Inspired, by Benson Bobrick. This is the quote. It can be said that next to the Bible itself, the English Bible is the most influential book ever published. It gave every literate person access to the sacred text, which sparked the Protestant Reformation, changed the Western world forever. It led directly to commercial printing, Gutenberg's press, and the proliferation of books. It shaped English literature and speech. The Puritans and Pilgrims took the translated English Bible with them to America and transplanted its values, laws, and ideals. That's the end of the quote. Translating the Bible into English was transformative. And I would contend that anybody who is studying translation or interested in it, doing a project, needs to have a basic understanding of how the translated English Bible came to be. From my experience, people who are very familiar with the Bible through their contact with a church or a Bible study group, they're very ill-informed about the translation of the Bible into English. And one of my goals with talks like this is to provide some illumination on that subject. I'm going to talk about another concept for you here about different kinds of Bibles. There's certainly a personal meditation Bible, right? A lot of people use it for devotions. They consult it every day. They have texts that inspire and comfort them. This devotional Bible is something that people will read from beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation, maybe more than once in their lifetime. They don't understand a lot of it. It's incomprehensible even to scholars in some places. But they read it as an exercise. There's also what I would call the Bible Study Bible. And this is a Bible that gets the focus of religious instruction in a catechism class or Sunday school, a Bible study group. And this Bible study Bible is often a reinforcement of existing bias or doctrinal positions. We study the Bible in order to reflect our Methodist, our Baptist, our evangelical, whatever framework we are working in. This is not open and scholarly. A Bible study Bible is meant to study what we already know about the Bible and get reinforcement from it. There is also a scholar's Bible. And because I've worked on archaeological excavation in the Holy Land on a couple of occasions, I think of the scholar's Bible as an archaeological excavation. Scholars punch in at different levels of the Bible, different parts of the Old Testament, New Testament, and they ask the tough questions. They ask questions about where did these books come from? Who wrote them, right? How did so many things that we know are part of Babylonian culture get appropriated after the fact into Hebrew culture? These are tough questions that scholars have to deal with. What source manuscripts are reliable? What are you going to use as a basis for your translation? The New Revised Standard Version, 1989, the New King James, it's in the 20th century, it's fairly recent, but it's based on a translation from 1611. So you have this wide range of translations, and what did they use to get to the final product? Scholars ask those kinds of questions, and they are not always easy answers. The scholars know that there are no definitive answers to a lot of these questions. Finally, there's the translator's Bible, right? And that's the Bible that is the focus tonight. 99% of English speakers and readers do not read the original biblical languages. You don't read ancient Hebrew. You don't read Koine Greek of the New Testament. And you don't read Aramaic. But you read the Bible. So you are disconnected from the original languages. You are reliant exclusively on a translator to access this material. I guess I would say there is no Bible for you without translators. And that's a simple fact. There's the doctrine of inspiration you may be familiar with. The writers of the Bible must have been inspired to do what they did. If you make that statement, you've got to say the translators were inspired too, because that's who you are depending on to get your material. All right. If you go to the sheet that I handed out, you will see a heading, Notable Historic Achievements in Bible Translation. These are 5 anchor points in the history of translation. You cannot discuss the English Bible without these 5 documents. And I just want to take a quick moment with each one. The Septuagint goes back to the 2nd century BC. It was carried out by Jewish intellectuals in Alexandria, which was the center of learning in the ancient world. And the translation was from Hebrew to Greek. It's kind of puzzling when you think about it. Why would Jewish intellectuals, rabbis, and so on, want to take their Torah, their 39 books, and put it into Greek? A couple of reasons. Greek was the dominant culture and the dominant language of that period. They overwhelmed everything in the culture. The Jews were afraid of linguistic extinction if they did not get their documents into the dominant language of the period. Made sense, right? And it worked. It probably saved the 39 books, or at least most of them. There's another reason. Up to that point, the Jewish people had been subjected to regular persecutions, regular dislocations, where they had their culture threatened by a larger power. And if they didn't get their books into Greek, they were afraid, because of their tendency to have these problems, that they would lose contact with their linguistic heritage, their biblical heritage. So the Septuagint was a brilliant stroke to do it, because it saved the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, from extinction, but it also became the source for future translations as the Bible translation moved forward. So we'll go to the second one, the Vulgate. This is the translation of the Bible, the entire thing, Old and New, into Latin in the 4th century CE or AD. So this is around 375. St. Jerome went into a grotto in the basement of the Bethlehem Nativity Church. I don't know, anybody been there? It's quite compelling. He sat just in this hollowed out cave area, and he translated the whole Bible into Latin. The importance of the Vulgate is he was the first scholar translator. He learned Greek, he learned Hebrew, and of course he was versed in Latin. And so he combined the best that he could source about the Old and New Testament and put it into the Latin language. Being the first scholar translator, he set a real pattern for future translations. Why did he do it in Latin? What was the dominant culture in the 4th century AD? Rome and Latin. Did Cicero, Suetonius, Tacitus, did those Roman intellectuals speak Latin? No, they spoke Greek. It was déclassé to speak Latin. That was the peasant language. Greek was to celebrate the monumental achievements of the Greeks, and the Romans worshipped the Greeks. Everything about them, they emulated them, including in their language. So Jerome knew that if he was going to get the Bible to the people, it had to go through the Latin language. It took him many decades to do it. To give you an idea of the importance of this translation, it lasted for 1,000 years as the official translation of the Catholic Church. 1,000 years until 1582, when the Douay translation was finally published. That was the first time it was eclipsed. There's another translation for the Catholic Church called the Jerusalem Bible, and that appeared in 1966. You could well ask yourself, how can a translation be Jewish or Protestant or Catholic? An uncomfortable truth that has to be acknowledged here is that translators bring biases to the translation. If you're translating for a Catholic audience, guess what? Your language is going to be Catholic infused. If you're translating for an evangelical Protestant audience, your language will be infused with doctrinal, dogmatic, charged, coded language from that group. So you have to be very careful. Translators are tricky people. They control the language. Then the Wycliffe Bible, the third one on the sheet. I've said this is probably the most significant document in Western civilization in English. It's the first entire translation of the Bible into Middle English in 1382 by John Wycliffe. He didn't do it by himself. He had help from a man named Purvey and a guy named Nicholas of Hereford. They were colleagues at Oxford. They were all three priests, and they were all sick to death of the Catholic Church, sick of the indulgences and payments that had to be made to get to a better place in purgatory and so on. And they decided, with Wycliffe being the leader, that the language of the Bible needed to be in English, not Latin. So Wycliffe took the Vulgate of St. Jerome, and he translated it from Latin to Middle English, and he kept the word order and the syntax of Latin. It's an incredibly awkward document, but it preserved it in what resembled the English language of the day. You couldn't read it very easily. Probably 60% of the words in Wycliffe's translation you would not recognize. You would recognize cognates, but it wouldn't go smoothly for you. But it was the first time somebody who was at least semi-literate in English could pick up a translation and say, I now can read it. The priest doesn't have to tell me what it says. I don't have to know scholastic Latin to get access to it. I can do it for myself. That lit the fuse for the Protestant Reformation. That's what undermined the authority of the Catholic Church, and they were unhappy, very unhappy. So that is a very significant document, to say the least. There are 20 copies of Wycliffe's Bible that have survived. Most of them are in the Bodleian at Oxford, and some at Cambridge, and a couple scattered around in museums of the world. Abraham Lincoln had a copy of the Wycliffe Bible. That shouldn't surprise you. Lincoln was a man of the people, right? He was somebody that celebrated the individual, respected the individual. And the Wycliffe Bible opened up the Bible for the peasant, for the individual who didn't have any training, but wanted to know what was being communicated in it. All right, the fourth one is the King James Version. You're more familiar with this. By the way, I should say that Wycliffe died before he could be tortured and burned. Fortunately for him, he was hounded after his translation appeared. And the church was so angry after his death that they dug up his remains, burned them, and scattered them in the ocean. His name was vilified. He did pull a fast one on the church. He found out that somebody representing the Catholic Church was buying up copies of his translation at a very high price. And so he and his colleagues produced many translations to sell through an intermediary and then used the profits to make more. and then shipped them in the dark to England from Belgium. King James. This was, of course, a monumental translation, a major anchor point in the history of the English Bible. King James I commissioned it. He himself knew Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. This is an English king. He was a Scotsman. His mother, Mary, had her head taken off by Elizabeth I, and they called to him because he was the rightful heir. He came with some trepidation. My mother has just been beheaded by the English throne, but the English welcomed him, and he became king for many decades and did some great things for the English people. He commissioned 54 Oxford and Cambridge scholars to translate the Bible using the original language sources. These were amazing individuals. They knew Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Aramaic. They were the most studied individuals in the kingdom. And they were brought together in 6 companies of 9 and told to go to work on various sections of the Bible. Guess what? They used the Septuagint and the Vulgate as their sources. So now you see why that Septuagint translation from Hebrew to Greek and the Vulgate Latin into Latin became so key to the progression that we're talking about. It took 6 years for the translation to finish. Really quite an amazing feat. Why did he do it? Why did he need another one? In 1525, William Tyndale had done a perfectly good translation, and the language of that is still in the King James Bible. So why did we need a new one? There were political reasons as well as religious reasons. King James realized that he had 3 competing Bibles going on. He had the Bishop's Bible, which was the Bible of the Anglican Church. He had the Geneva Bible of John Calvin. That was a Protestant Bible. And he had the Douay Bible, which was the Catholic translation. And what he wanted was one translation that brought them all together so everybody could sing Kumbaya under one biblical banner. And it didn't work. The Geneva Bible outsold the King James Bible by far for over 150 years. The King James Bible didn't emerge as the giant among translations that it is for about 150 years after it was initially translated. It did succeed in this sense. You can walk into a lot of churches in this country and still find the King James Version sitting in the pew, can't you? It's there. People still read it as the definitive translation. And as I said earlier, it set a standard for creativity, a mastery of style that really helped define the English language going forward. But it didn't succeed in the sense that the Geneva Bible outsold it, and dozens of translations occurred after the King James. In fact, the King James initiated a period of translation that has not stopped in your lifetime. There are over 500 complete translations of the Bible in English, extant, out there. So the King James didn't put a stop to anything. It didn't create any harmony of views. It actually kind of precipitated translation as an international phenomenon. Luther is going to come along in 1534, Martin Luther, and translate it into German. So he's ahead of the King James Bible and the King James 1611. So between those two phenomena, the Bible became an international phenomenon as a multi-translated text in all languages. To scholars, the King James is a museum piece. And you have to understand, it's a museum piece because it did not have very good sources. It used the Septuagint, it used the Vulgate, but it also used manuscripts from the 10th to 12th century. Stay with me here. 10th to 12th century. The Bibles you're reading now in translation have access to documents from the 4th century. Okay? 600 years closer to the source. And that matters. There are a couple rules in translating the Bible that you should be aware of. The earlier the source, the more reliable the translation is going to be. Okay? The closer we can get to the original. Because we don't have originals. They don't exist. They're called the Apocrypha, not the Apocrypha. They're called the Autographa, the autographs. They don't exist. They may be found someday, but right now the best we can do is the 4th century AD. Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus. Those three are virtually complete Old and New Testaments from period 350 to 375 AD. Do you think those documents are reflected in your translation? They're not. They're not. You think the Dead Sea Scrolls are reflected in your translation? They were discovered in 1947. They go back to the 1st century BC. Every book of the Bible except Esther is represented in the Dead Sea documents. But they're not in your translation either. Why? Going back and undoing translations of the Bible and adding material just because you discovered it in archaeological excavations makes everybody very nervous, especially believers, right? You're going to mess with my Bible? You're going to change things? What changes is that going to make for doctrine or theology? So, biblical scholarship is in a ferment. What to do with new things? There's new stuff being unearthed in the sands of Egypt and Jordan every day. They're finding stuff and not incorporating it into new translations. Maybe in your lifetime, everyone here is much younger than I. And maybe in your lifetime, a Bible translation will come out that says, okay, we have now the best of the best sources, and we're going to reflect them. The Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, have a Psalm 151. You know how many Psalms are in traditional Old Testament? Who knows your Bible? Nope. There are 150. So there's an outlier. There's one extra one. You think it's in your translations? Nope. It has not been given sanction. And then we revised standard. I don't need to talk about that at any length. It was produced in 1989 as an attempt to get the best sources and clean up the language a little bit. And I would say to you, there is no definitive translation. I'm always asked if I talk to a group, what's the best translation? What should I read? What's the best? There is no best. But if you want to have closest to the best in terms of scholarship, it would be the New Revised Standard of 1989. All right, let's switch to a couple of other things. If you don't regard a holy book as the basis of your faith, you don't subscribe to a faith based on the Quran or words of Buddha or the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindu faith, then you have no problem looking at those books in a very free-thinking, open way, right? You can study them as literary artifacts. For example, Christians like to study the Hindu scripture And words of Buddha have some good advice for people how to live their lives, but they're not regarded as sacred. And so when Jews and Christians have their Bibles subjected to critical discussion, they can become somewhat defensive. It can become very controversial. And that, are you nodding? Is that true for you? Have you had experience with that?
With controversies surrounding. Thank you. With controversies surrounding religions and stuff like that, I have had some personal experience with that.
With respect to Christian or Jewish?
One of those, yes.
Yeah, okay. And the same thing goes for Buddhists. The last time I was here, there was somebody, a Hindu, a Muslim, and it turned around for them. They resented their books being treated just like literature rather than sacred text. The same thing. So, because of that, I try to be as sensitive as I can. But some of the things I'm going to talk about now in this next period of time are controversial. And so I ask you to accept it as the product of scholarship and certainly weigh in with any questions or objections or anything that you wish. Let's start first with one of the foundational competencies in any translation activity, and that is language competence. If you're a Bible translator, you need to know Hebrew, Koine Greek, and Aramaic, or otherwise you can't succeed, obviously, just as you can't unless you know your language perfectly well. Ancient Hebrew is a difficult language. It is a vocabulary of 5,000 words. That's it. 5,000 words. And it is a consonantal language. Only consonants, no vowels. 22 consonants comprise the Hebrew Bible. There are many languages that are older than Hebrew. Tamil in India, Sanskrit, of course, Egyptian, Coptic, but Hebrew is still a language that has preserved its essential structure. In 900 AD, 900 years after the period of Christ, a group of people called the Masoretes decided to put vowels in the consonants. Okay? They wanted to insert vowels between the consonants to clarify what the text was trying to say. If you go to your sheet, the handout, you'll see there's a consonantal word, DRK. Depending on what vowels the Masoretes put in, it could mean to count, ascribe, a book, or to declare. If you did D-E-R-E-K or D-A-R-A-K, it changed the word completely. So the translation that the Masoretes did in 900 AD was a lot of guesswork. Now they could use context to help them decide what word would work, what vowels to add, but it was still a certain amount of guesswork. Take a look at the next one, KBD. It's a Hebrew word. It can be kibbut, with I and E vowels, meaning he honored, or kabad, meaning glory, or kabed, meaning liver. Now, go to the Psalm 16, verse 9, and look at the translator's dilemma. My heart is glad, my glory rejoices. Actually should read, my heart is glad, my liver rejoices. Because stop and think, how can glory rejoice, right? A lot of times when you're reading the Bible, you go, that's beautiful. My glory rejoicing. But it doesn't really make sense. Well, how does liver make sense? The ancient Hebrews believed that emotions were centered in body organs. So making it, my heart is glad, my liver rejoices, made perfect sense and would have been the preferred translation. But it's the former one with glory that has persisted. Take a look at Job 13:15. This one relies on one vowel in one word. The first version is from the NIV. That's the New International Version of 1978. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. And then we go to the Revised Standard Version, 1952, another mainstream Protestant translation. Behold, he will slay me, I have no hope. Yet I will defend my ways to his face. Completely opposite sentiments, right? And they're in translations that agree in almost everything else. Certainly doctrinally, they're very similar translations. But you have this image of Job, that he was patient, or he was defiant, which is it? And some of that confusion comes from passages like this that can go one way or the other, depending on one vowel difference in the Hebrew word, the consonant. There's another phenomenon in both the New and Old Testament, and that's something called Hoeksema. Take a look on your sheet there. It's the next entry. It's for Greek meaning only said once. There are 15 hypoxes in the Hebrew Bible, that is the Old Testament, and 500 in the New Testament. What are they? They're words that occur one time and have no idea what they mean. They come out of the blue. It's like I'm talking to you and I go, and then I continue making sense. But I said, good. Excuse me? The hypoxlegomena, there are enough of them that they can be disruptive to the flow and meaning of a biblical text, and certainly posing an issue for a translator. What do you do with it? Do you guess? There's a riotous, somewhat scatological example. You may know the story of Balaam and his ass. He's on a donkey, and he commands the donkey to move, and the donkey won't move, and God's voice comes down and tells him to get off the donkey, and it says he jumped off the donkey and farted. That's in a translation. Why? Because it's a hypoxlegomena, but it looks very much like a word in another Semitic language that could be read that way. And the translator took a shot and put it in. So translation as guesswork with a hypoxlegomena is part of the whole package when you are translating the Bible. We talked a little about controversy, and I've got some examples here I'd like you to take a look at. Isaiah 7:14 is a very familiar passage to many of you. And a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. That's from the King James. The Revised Standard of 1952 has, a young woman is with child and shall bear a son. Can you tell me why that's just absolutely shocking? Anybody? Yeah.
The second translation suggests that Mary wouldn't be a virgin.
Exactly. That's pretty central to the Catholic core beliefs, isn't it? It's actually called Mariolatry in the Catholic tradition, the veneration, the near divinity of Mary. And Christians like to use this passage to say that Mary was a virgin, as if this passage refers to her. Jews do not feel that this passage has anything to do with Mary in any way. It's totally out of context for them in relation to the Christian view of Mary as a virgin. But why is it changed? We're going to go back to the Septuagint. The Septuagint translated Betula, which means young woman. It means young woman in Hebrew. They rendered it as Parthenos, which means virgin. And what did the Vulgate use? What did the King James use? They used the Parthenos translation. And so virgin came into the translated text. But once sources were revealed that this was not in the original Hebrew at all, it's just a young woman bearing a child, it had to be changed. The New Revised Standard has young woman already in 1952, and then the new in 1989 as well. Take a look at Psalm 23:6, maybe one of the most revered and familiar of all Bible verses. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's King James. The Hebrew Bible says, I will dwell in the temple as long as I live. The Revised Standard and the New Revised Standard say, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. Christians look at Psalm 23:6 and say, aha, there's a text that proves the afterlife. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever, in heaven. And the Jewish reading of it is, all they're saying here is, I'll be a good temple goer. As long as I have life, as long as I breathe, I'll go to temple. That's all it's saying. But the translator turned it into a Christian doctrine that reinforces the notion of heaven. A key Christian concept, but the Jews don't have an afterlife in their belief system. They were starting to develop one in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The scroll, Sons of Darkness and Sons of Light, looks like they're starting to develop an incipient doctrine of surviving this life. Because it's really hard to live existentially and say, no, there's really nothing. We turn to dust and it's over. Christianity couldn't abide that. They needed a Redeemer hero and produced one. Judaism never did. And this text right here in Psalm 23 puts those two views just in very clear relief. Yes, ma'am.
It's, I think this is a psalm of reference in funerals.
Yes. Yes, because they're transporting someone figuratively and through poetry to the next life. Yes. So next time you go to a funeral, you can interrupt and say, hold it. That's not what they meant.
Bring this.
Yeah. It just meant you were a faithful churchgoer, and that's it. Don't make a big deal out of it. Except in some very Orthodox Jewish settings where ancient Hebrew is spoken, read, there is very little connection to the original biblical languages for the average person. And I think it's really interesting to me, anyway, that all the world's great religions have a very troubled relationship with their original languages. The Hindus for example, have the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, documents that we have pretty good copies of. The Hindu holy books were written in the Sanskrit, and Hindus have a very liberalized view of translating their books. Go ahead, translate them, spread them to every language and dialect that you wish. No problem. The words of Buddha are a little more complicated. They were in oral form through recitation, repetition for many centuries. And finally, in 25 BC, in something called the Pali Canon, a lot of Buddha's thoughts and treatises were put into a document, a written document. The first English translation of that document does not appear until 1840. 1840. And Buddhists have no problem with translating their sacred texts. They do not become defensive about that, and they're very willing to elaborate in English on anything that comes from this translation. There have been new translations since, but there is no single translation of all of Buddha's works. In fact, much of what he said is lost forever to history. The Muslims think everyone should read the Quran in Arabic. And for many centuries, if you translated any word from the Quran, you could be executed. You could be under a fatwa for distorting the language of the Prophet. Now, that had to change because it's estimated that only about 50% of Muslims can read Arabic right now in the Muslim world. And so they have to have translations. And there are now translations out there of the Quran in English, and some very conservative imams do object to that vociferously, but there they are. And it's the only way to really communicate the religion in a generalized way. It underscores the point again. Religions get disconnected from their original languages, and translators move in to do the job. Because you can't read the originals, the translator can, and you have to trust that the translator is doing the right job. There is one other controversial thing on the sheet I wanted to go to. It's after the Psalm 23 statement. It's the sayings from the cross. Now, this is cutting a little close to the heart of the matter, because Jesus' sayings from the cross are precious items in Christianity. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Today you shall be with me in paradise. You know, maybe. The problem is the earliest manuscripts only have two sayings from the cross. Remember I told you there were manuscripts from the 4th century? The codexes, Sinaiticus, Vaticanus, Alexandrinus. They only have two sayings, and they're the most logical ones. Take care of my mother, and I'm thirsty. What you'd expect a dying person to say. But what happens over the next 6 centuries is more sayings of the cross start to appear in documents. What's happening? The copyists are starting to add until they can get to the perfect number 7. Because we'll get to this in a moment about numerology in the Bible, but the number 7 carries with it ultimate sense of harmony and completeness. So they were added, and they're called pious extrapolations or interpolations. This, of course, I learned this at the Near East School of Archaeology in Jerusalem. It was shocking to me then, and it's still surprising to hear that this is the way this saying's progressed. You will not hear this in any catechism class or any sermon. And if you bring it up to your minister, he's liable to say, I don't think so. I'm not willing to accept that. Bible translation is the ultimate interdisciplinary exercise as well. And you can surely appreciate this because if you are a translator, you have to engage in research. Even if you're dealing with a contemporary poem, there could be something in there you don't understand what the allusion is. What's the historical reference? And you have to dig. You've got to localize. You've got to zero in. Well, biblical translation involves research to the extreme. It involves historians, linguists, archaeologists, anthropologists, forensic scientists, almost any discipline you can name. And I would say they have been brought to bear on the Bible to try to illuminate the text, to try to clarify problems and make the translation clearer. If you go to the sheet, at the bottom of the first page, the foundational concept of interdisciplinarity and research. Cultural context is, did you find it?
The second sheet.
Bottom of page 1. Yeah. You have Psalm 119, 105. This has always been a puzzle of a text to people. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? It's a nice metaphor. But actually, if you go to Lebanon, Syria, Jordan today, and you get out into the deep countryside on a mountain path, you will see somebody with a little lamp on their foot, and it's lit. It's lit so that walking like in the dark, you don't stumble over a rock or fall off the edge of the path. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet. And that's cultural. And it was in the ancient time, and it is still today. And somebody looking at the cultural practices was able to illuminate that text. Take a look at Exodus 3:8, Numbers 14:8, and Deuteronomy 31:20. The phrase occurs 3 times in the Old Testament. A land flowing with milk and honey makes the promised land sound just like a wonderful place, almost a resort. If you've been to Israel or Jordan, you know it's a harsh land. It's a very harsh land. And the correct translation of that is a land fit for bees and, get it right, wild goats and bees. Not milk and honey. But the translator wanted to make the promised land sound truly great, wonderful place to go, and adapted that translation. Proverbs 25:22, Romans 12:20, a text that has bewildered people. You can bring this up to your minister. He won't be, or she won't be upset with you at all on this one. If your enemy offends you, heap coals of fire on his head. This is Pauline. If your enemy offends you, heap coals of fire on his head. Sounds like vengeance. Sounds like a destructive act. Again, if you go into the cultural context, which the translator has to do, has to zero in. Let's say you're in Lebanon, and you're in peasant country, out in the countryside. How are they carrying coals? On the head. Coals had to be kept alive for heat and cooking. And so what better gift, and in this sense, a Christian sense, or Jewish sense, I'm not going to hurt my enemy, I'm going to heap coals of fire on his head. I'll make him my confidant, my friend. So coals of fire on the head was a sign of life. It was a sign of that which enables you to stay warm and cook your food properly. So there's so much in the Bible. You could practically take any page and look at it and say, that doesn't quite make sense. I'm not sure what it means, but it is biblical. It must be true. It must be valid. And yet there are mysteries because the translator hasn't solved all of the linguistic, metaphorical, or cultural issues in the process of translating. Let's go to numerology for a moment. I guess the whole text of that Romans is on the top of the second page if you want to consult it. Ancient numerology. Anybody here have a lucky number? No? Anybody have an unlucky number? Numerology is as old as the caves of Lascaux and Altamira. They have found that certain scratches indicate certain numbers were considered potent, symbolically potent, going back to our ancient ancestors. But numerology is something that's sort of built into the human form. There's no way to get rid of it. And it is something that's in the Bible, in dramatically so. The reason for numerology is because in a pre-science world, the fact that chaos and violence existed made people want to grab onto something that had meaning, even if it was a bit absurd. And so certain numbers began to have mystical qualities about them. You may have heard of angel numbers, 1212, 77. You're probably familiar with astrology. Astrology and numerology are cousins. It's, maybe you believe in astrology. I have one daughter that does. I can't break her of it, and I shouldn't try. But it's the same concept that certain numbers possess harmony and invoke a mystical impact on human lives. The numbers in the Bible. What numbers in the Bible strike you as being repetitive? Any that you can think of based on your experience with it?
3.
3, 7,
12.
12,
40.
40, lots of 40s. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 years. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites wandered in the wilderness out of Egypt for 40 years. Coincidence? No, numerology. 1 is even a big number in the Bible. The Jewish people had an obsession with the number 1. They were bouncing around the ancient world, running into all these polytheistic cultures, right? All the cultures that they had contact with, Egyptian, Babylonian, Persian, Hittite, Akkadian, all had pantheons of many gods. What were the Jews? They were monotheists. They had one God. In fact, they have this obsessive text. Make sure I get it. Yet the Lord our God is one God. And it was repeated many times in the book of Genesis, especially. It has numerical value in Christian thought as well. The believer is said you should be one with Christ, one, and Jesus is one with the Father, and the Trinity is 3 in 1, and in marriage the two shall become one. One is a way of focusing intently on the idea that Yahweh or Jehovah is the one true God and the only God in a world that was awash in gods for thunder and lightning and everything natural in the world. So numerology in 1 is very powerful. Some of you mentioned 3. You know why 3 is numerologically powerful?
Jesus died 33 years old.
That is the fact that 3 days involved in his death and resurrection, parts of 3 days, is certainly an echo of that. Yeah.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Yep. It's 3 in 1, but it's still 3. I mean, paradox, but the 3 is very much part of that. It's the power of triangles, partly. Picture a pyramid in Egypt. Why are they built that way? The triangle had mystical power in the ancient world. Can't tell you why, but it did. There was a sense also that the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, when they came down, formed a triangle, and that the Garden of Eden, the Mesopotamian region, was a 3-sided beginning of man's journey on earth. 4 is also a sacred number. And that's really easy to see in a naturalistic way. You have north, south, east, and west. You have 4 seasons. Of course, 4 is just going to have to be a strong number. 7 may be the strongest of all. It's considered a symbol of perfection and divinity. Ancients thought there were 7 planets in the universe. 7 animals sealed a business transaction in the Old Testament. There's just 7s everywhere, and that is repeated in the New Testament as well. That's why Jesus' sayings on the cross have to eventually become 7. So numerology to a numerologist means that none of the numbers in the Bible have mathematical certainty. Okay? They recognize them as part of the numerological metric. To believers, the numbers in the Bible are literal. They all happened exactly as said in the Bible. If it says Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, it's 40 days. Never mind the numerological system. Now, for translators, how about their problem? Absolutely none. They just translate the number, right? It's the easiest problematic area for translators because they don't have to deal with the symbolic quality of it. They simply translate the number and move on. Literary critics, teachers of literature, critics of literature have contributed tremendously to translation effectiveness of the Bible. And it was literary scholars rather, who recognized things going on in the Bible that were of great value to translators. The literary scholars were the first to recognize that there were multiple authors of the book of Genesis. And now it's generally recognized that there are 4 authors of that book. Not one, not Moses, but 4, because they all have a different name for God. They use Yahweh, they use El, they use Elohim, and these are different writers writing from different perspectives. El is singular, Elohim is plural. At one point, almost certainly, the Hebrews were polytheistic. Another heresy, number 48. But there is evidence that the Hebrews had polytheistic adaptations from the groups that they encountered. Literary critics also recognize the different styles that writers used in the Bible. When you read the Bible, I bet you get the same sensation I do frequently, that it all sounds alike. It's something I call Bibleese. As if one author wrote the whole thing in the same voice, the same style. You know the phenomenon I'm talking about? And it is something that translators tried to achieve, to make it all sound biblical. A majestic style, a smooth style. But in fact, what literary scholarship has shown is the very different authors and what they brought to the books that is missing when you chop the heads off, the stylistic head off every author. The book of Mark is the first gospel. It's also the shortest gospel. It has just 16 chapters. And his sentences are short. His word order is very clipped. He gets right to the point. His first scene is the baptism of Jesus. No birth, no virgin mother, none of that stuff. Jesus is an instant adult getting baptized by John, and let's get on with it. So right away, you're dealing with a different authorial persona. Matthew is a much longer gospel, comes next. That's 26 chapters, and he's an intellectual bully. He insults the reader. He starts out giving you a genealogy of 3 sets of 14. What's his goal? He wants to prove to you that Joseph, the father of Jesus, descended from King David. Why? Because David was the first Messiah, Mashiach. He was anointed with oil. That's all that Messiah means. He was the first king to be anointed with oil. And so, if Jesus is to be the Messiah, he also has to be following from the line of King David. So Matthew starts with 3 sets of 14 and begat this, and he begat Joseph. And then he takes the break and he gives you the virgin birth. See a problem there? Joseph wasn't the father. The Holy Spirit was the father. And Matthew does not expect his audience to even catch on to that. He beats you over the head throughout his book with his intelligence. He's obviously a high level of intelligence and education for his time. And what happens when you read the Gospels, they kind of sound alike, but if you take your time and look for the signs, the stylistic differences are dramatic. If you read Paul, who is generally considered to be the father of Christianity, because he answered most of the tough questions about what the new faith was going to look like. And he went to Athens, didn't he? He spoke at the Agora in Athens. And he held his own. He's a smart man, very smart man. And his rhetoric in the epistles is quite amazing to study and very different from other parts of the New Testament. So stylistic differences have to be recognized. A good translation would bring that out. more than the kind of clipped Bibleese that you encounter now. Just a couple more quick things, and I'll let you go. I told you that the Hebrews wandered for hundreds of years and encountered other cultures. And in the process, they borrowed wholesale large chunks of literature and plopped it into the Old Testament. The story of Noah is directly borrowed from something called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the story of Noah by 1,000 years. And we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. You can buy it in the bookstore. And it's virtually the same story. A flood, a man told to get in a big boat. And it's borrowed from this culture, from Sumerians. There's also Hammurabi's Law Code. You may have heard of it. It's in the British Museum. You can walk right up to it and touch it. Hammurabi's Law Code predates the Mosaic Code and the Ten Commandments by well over 1,000 years. It has a presumption of innocence. It has eye for an eye, vengeance on the guilty. It was what the Bible copied in developing its law codes. It's undeniable.
Which culture is that?
Of the Hammurabi, Babylonian. Yes. There's also, in the Bible, you know in the Old Testament that there were what's called the longevities, people who lived a very long time. And maybe you know how long Methuselah was said to live. Anybody know?
900 years.
969. Yes, 969. And Enoch lived 370 something. And there are about 8 of them who are given these extraordinary long lives. The Sumerians also had a list of what's called longevities, of leaders who lived just ridiculously long lives. And the whole point of it is to lionize important people in the culture by giving them long life. And the Bible didn't invent that. They appropriated it from the Sumerian context. One other one, you may know Moses' story as a baby. He's put into a basket in the bulrushes because Pharaoh wants to kill all the babies under 2. And it just so happens that in the tale of Sargon, he is abandoned in a basket on the Euphrates, rescued by the goddess Ishtar, and made a ruler, just as Moses was made an important figure in Egypt. So it's again what the literary scholar can do in ferreting out influences and borrowings and adaptations, which I think enriches understanding. I want to know as much about the Bible as I can. I don't want it to be that closed little book that sits on a table and you open it up and you read your precious text. And that's fine, there's a place for that. But if you have an inquiring mind, which a lot of translators and scholars do, they want to open it up and let the birds fly out and find out what really happened. How did this all come to be? And why is it copies of things that happened so far in advance of the biblical record? And why are the writers the way they are? What styles did they produce? It just makes it more invigorating for me as a document. And I must say, when I talk to groups, they'll always ask me at the beginning, well, where do you go to church? What's your belief system? And I said, I'm not going to answer that and spoil everything. Because if I tell you, well, I belong to the First Evangelical Lutheran, or I belong to an AEM, an African Episcopal Methodist Black Church, well, you put me in a box, right? And anything I say that's controversial or goes against the orthodoxy that you've been taught, Well, he said that because of what he is. So I never answer that question until I'm finished with a lecture, and then they can ask me if they want to, but I don't want to spoil it. But I gave talks for a long time after I retired in Las Cruces, New Mexico, to something called the Academy of Learning in Retirement. It was all seniors. They all had hair like mine and children. And it was the best audience in the world. These old people, they leaned forward on their seat and they challenged me on everything, and they listened so intently I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on. It was kind of spooky. And I found out afterwards that the majority of them had been fed religion all their lives. They had been told by a minister, a priest, a rabbi, what to think. And they listened to sermons willingly. They went with their wife and kids and baptized and married and buried people in the church. But they never could ask the questions they really wanted to ask, because it would make them sound like doubters or skeptics or worse, agnostics or atheists. And they just sucked me dry with questions because this was their last chance to get answers. These were end-of-life questions that were coming at me. You're all young people. You have time, well, you're middle-aged.
Dang, you just want to help her out.
I should have let it stand. Yeah. A very young middle-aged. So it's just, again, back to the notion of audience too. Students can tell me whether they learned it in a religious setting or whether they only know a little bit or they have no feeling about it whatsoever. But seniors have questions that speak to how they're going to end their life and on what terms. So that was kind of an interesting thing. How you doing? You got 5 more minutes in you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I don't know where this is on the sheet exactly. Let's see. Yes, it's about a third of the way down. You see the Ecclesiastes verse 12, 13? Okay. There is something that occurs in copying the Bible and translating the Bible that's called interpolation. And that's when writers or copyists working by candlelight in a monastery decide to add something because, it'd just be better if it had something clarifying the problem. And so these pop up with great frequency in the Bible, and Ecclesiastes 12:13 is a classic example. If you know Ecclesiastes, you know there's a time for this and a time for that, a time to reap, a time to sow, a time to live, a time to die. It's a very dualistic, Manichaean, existential, this is life. You eat, you go to the bathroom, and you die. That's the course of human events. And here's the last verse of that very crude, basic existential document. Now, all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. It's just jarring. It doesn't fit the book at all. And the manuscript tradition shows that it pops up very late. It pops up somewhere around the 10th century that appears, but nothing prior. Not in the Septuagint, not in the Vulgate. This verse does not appear, but it is interpolated. One more, Gospel of Mark. It stops at verse 9, verse 8 actually, when the women flee the empty tomb. It's very significant that it's women who find the empty tomb. There's been a lot written about that. But Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, I believe it is, come and find the rock rolled away, Jesus gone. End of Mark book. But then, in the 10th, 11th century, somewhere in there, the manuscript tradition pops up with another set of verses. And they are the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, just listed one after the other. Why? Because the other Gospels have post-resurrection appearances. And if Mark doesn't have them, then you don't have the synoptic Gospels. You don't have the agreement that they're all telling the same story. And so some very pious clerk copied those resurrection appearances. Read it sometime when you have a chance to open a Bible and look at those last verses of Mark. It's just a pious addition. Mark 3, the next one, 2021. Did you know this was in your Bible? His mother and brothers went to take charge of him, meaning Jesus, for they said he is out of his mind. And look at the translation, New International, 1978, Evangelical Translation. Take charge of him, he's out of his mind. You'll find variations on out of his mind in other translations, but they don't try to sanitize it. It's brutal. Jesus, the Savior, out of his mind. It's hard to see how that one didn't get leveled, didn't get copied out somewhere in the dead of night hundreds of years ago. So those are some of the fundamental concepts related to Bible translation. You just have some loose ends at the end of this handout that I will very quickly go over. You see the John Wycliffe, 1384, the Tyndale, 1525, the Geneva, 1560, the Revised Standard. The first part of it was 46 and then completed in 52. King James. The Jerusalem Bible, 1966, is a Catholic translation, but it's translated from a French edition. Remember when early on in this session I told you with the Septuagint to Wycliffe, you went from Hebrew to Greek to Latin to English. If you want to realize the complexity of what's involved in getting a Bible in front of you and saying this is the authoritative Word of God, and you see these linguistic handoffs going over the centuries, you realize just how much more complex it is than maybe you thought. So the Jerusalem Bible translated from the French into English. The Living Bible I would avoid like the plague. This translator has no knowledge of biblical languages and doesn't pretend to. It's a paraphrase. And it perhaps brings comfort to some people, but as a translation, it's irresponsible. The best-selling translation, I know you were going to ask me, is the New International, and that's listed next. 1978, and it's still the best-selling Bible translation in English. There are about 75 million Bibles in English sold every year. 75 million. So it isn't all just trying to get to a better translation. It's a commercial franchise. If you're in a bookstore anytime soon, go down the aisle of Bibles. It is stupefying. The one I went to where I live now in North Carolina was easily 100 feet long, maybe longer. 3 shelves deep of Bibles, study Bibles, variations of this, new this, woman's Bible, brides. I list here some of the weirder ones. No, I don't. I have it somewhere else. Okay, here it is. There's Bibles for believers, brides, teenagers, children. There's a superheroes Bible. And my favorite, listen to this one. If you've got any attention left for me, listen to this beauty. It's called the Personal Promise Bible. You can customize with your own name and your own hometown. So the Lord is Bernie Shepherd, or woe unto you, Dallas. You can have your own Bible customized with your own inclusions. And of course, it's only $49.95. So those are some thoughts, a little at random, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or if you want to stay after and ask them individually, that's fine too. Yes?
Can you tell us what your is?
You what?
I don't go to church. I'm very familiar with the Bible because I was steeped in it as a kid in a Calvinist tradition, a Dutch Reformed tradition, homeschool church, just like the hero of James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. Everything suffocatingly in a bubble, reinforcing at school what you were taught at church, and then reinforced again at home, like a Strasbourg goose, till my liver was this big with religion. And then I decided I wanted to find out what was really going on with the Bible. So I started self-study around 15. It's about the time my dad and I got into trouble about it. And then as a college student, my parents thought it would be best if I got about 10,000 miles away from them. And they sent me to Jerusalem to study and to work on an archaeological dig where I was exposed to much more about what was really going on with religion, what part I wanted to accept and deal with. So I would label myself just agnostic. I don't have the answers. I like to probe it and do the literary scholar thing and try to find the puzzles and answer them. But I don't have any set belief system, no. Any other? Yes, sir.
I read the Bible in Aramaic. This is my mother tongue.
Uh-huh.
And when I was very young, I read it without critical thinking. But now I read Quran for my research, and I read Old Testament too.
Mm-hmm.
I see they are very similar.
You see what?
They are very similar.
Yes.
And so, do you think their origin was written by Sumerians?
Well, a lot of material is, yes. I mean, that's a mother source for a lot of biblical material and Quran. And the Quran is very derivative of the Bible. I mean, the Quran borrows, it has Jesus in it, it has the prophets, it has Old Testament ancient heroes. Everybody's borrowing from everybody else. One of the things that I say to shock students if I'm running a class is there's very little originality in the Bible. Even Jesus, I'm sorry to say, but Jesus is a classic universal redeemer hero. He's born under a celestial sign. He has an evil king after him. He has a virgin mother. He dies, goes to the other side, comes back and tells people it's not so bad. You could get there too. That's called a redeemer hero. Joseph Campbell wrote a book called Hero of a Thousand Faces. And he goes into all the ancient characters who are just like Jesus, doing the same series of steps. Now, this is heresy to anybody with a set belief system in Christianity. But I'm sorry, it exists in the literature and it exists in in historical record. But I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
I would like to have a follow-up question. So if there are so many other cultures that had those stories and had those same cultural ideas, why did the Bible become such a prominent, or maybe it's just temporary and then in the future we'll have another book. But for now, why is it so important and so influential? Like, to your opinion, what do you think?
Yeah, well, it has lasted for a while. All religions don't last forever. There are already dead religions. Taoism, Confucianism is basically dead. There are organized, large Zoroastrianism has a little tiny element in Persia, in Iran, and that is concurrent with Old New Testament. Religions don't last forever. Why has the Bible persisted? Is because it resonated, it spoke to people as reflective of their cultural values. For Jews, it's very clear, it's essential to their identity. To be a good Jew, to live the Jewish life, is anchored in the Bible. And it'd be like giving up on Israel, giving up on everything Jewish to give up on the Bible. So that's anchored. Christianity is salvation, and salvation is hard to resist. And when I read that quote at the beginning, when you have the Bible, English Bible, coming out of Europe and England over to America and transplanted in the most powerful country in the world eventually, that flourished in this country. And it's partly its political power, its centrality to the world that helps support Christianity as the primary religion for our country and the world. You have to realize that Joseph Campbell does a brilliant job of this. The earliest caves, the caves that we know are about 30,000 years old, Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain, they have images on the walls of animals that resurrect themselves. Deer lose antlers and get new ones. Snakes shed skin, they get a new one. Eagles get rid of feathers, they get new feathers. And the ancients looked at that kind of thing and they said, nature around us resurrects itself. Why not us? And so they began playing with images of resurrection, and resurrection kind of comes up out of the loam of ancient history, and Redeemer Hero is a character who has to carry the water for that idea. Jesus is a very seductive figure because he dies for us. It absolves sin and dies for us, but he is not unique. Dionysius in the Greek tradition is exactly the same thing. Do a little research if it interests you. Redeemer Hero would be the term that would get you to the base material.
Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. When you started, you said, look at the Bible as literature, right? So then you took away all mystical meaning, mysterious meaning of it. So how can we look at this as a literature when there is no mystical? It's like New York Times for me now.
It shouldn't be. I'm pointing out ways the Bible has evolved in different forms in the hands of translators, copyists, people who were trying to transmit it through history. It's still a vibrant document. It has some flaws. The Bible has some flaws if you're looking at it as a piece of literature. I know lots of people who study the Bible as I'm presenting it here, who are absolutely believers. They don't have any trouble with hanging on to their faith and going to church and observing all the sacraments and rituals. But I remember one old man stood up and said, well, what do you believe? Do you believe anything? And I said, I believe I don't want to check my brain at the front door of a church. I don't want to walk in and leave the brain over here and then just be stuffed full of whatever I'm supposed to absorb. And that's me. That's just me. I'm sorry if I've ruined the Bible for you.
Oh, no, it's not. So for us as a Muslim, so Jesus is not a God, is not Son
Right.
of God, he's a prophet, like Prophet Muhammad. But our mysticism, 80% of our mysticism is about Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
So the moral
Sure.
stories.
Well, it's like Thomas Jefferson's Bible, the New Testament. He took out all the biographical stuff and just has the words of Jesus. Thomas Jefferson's New Testament. He didn't want anything to do with miracles and virgin births and any of that. He just wanted the ideas of Jesus, which are pacifists, which are wonderful. Take care of the poor. Don't be a jerk in the world. Take care of each other. I mean, Jesus' message is wonderful. Gandhi perpetuated. Martin Luther King studied it. Jesus in the Muslim world is a different character, for sure. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, the other day I was like messing around online, just talking to anonymous students at UTD, and I basically asked the question whether God, do you think God exists? And this person responded to me like, well, even if you don't believe in God, what do you like? He asked me, do you think it's right that we should be peaceful to each other? We should love your neighbor, and those are very Christian values. And I thought about it, and while I'm personally atheist, but I'm familiar with the ideas, and I went to Catholic school for quite a few years. And I just answered him, well, it's hard for us to really think about those ideas just because, we think it's right doesn't really mean we agree with the values, but more that because Christian ideas have so impacted our moral compass, right? So I don't know, like without the Bible, would we really have had ideas that Jesus have taught in the New Testament?
Yeah. Well, the question is, can you be a moral person and not be a religious person? Mm-hmm. And I would hope most people would agree, absolutely you can. Did the words of Jesus in the Bible influence a tradition of high morality, of caring, of general humanity in the world? Yeah, probably, considering how influential Christianity is, especially in our society. But yeah, that one kind of bugs me sometimes, that if I don't go to church, if I don't believe everything, then I can't be a moral person. I can't do right by my fellow man or do the right thing. I appreciate your point. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I don't know much about the Bible or religion or anything like that, but I did appreciate where you positioned the translator as potentially having a political or crossover, I guess, an intersection with the political. It expanded my thinking on the capability of the translator, especially how you related power structures in language and how the translator can undermine those power structures. I thought that was very, very interesting. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You are in the hands of a translator, and that translator is a dangerous instrument sometimes, and for political reasons could insert something in the translation that is not supported by the record, and it one has to be aware of that, cautious of that in dealing with any translated text, especially biblical texts, I would say. Okay, well, thank you for your kind attention.
Professor Hoeksema, many thanks.
My
I
pleasure.
might go back to the Bible, which I have not been consulted for a little while in my life.
Which translation, Shilpa? Luther?
Yeah. So, but it's interesting that the point that you made, that the research over the years will rediscover the internal collections and the internal relationships. And I think that's part of the Bible research that we should pursue. And sometimes the Bible becomes dangerous because people only follow what's in there, and that can be dangerous. I grew up under different circumstances, and I would encourage you to rethink some of the passages in the Bible, because some of it is very well written. And I think that's my pleasure sometimes, reading or moments in the Bible. The other thing that I encourage you to take from the Bible, how important it is that you do continuous research, because that enlarges the interaction with your own brain. So thank you again.
Yes, sir.
Greatly appreciate it.